Can Russia get used to being China's little brother? You know, every time you see a headline associated with the Russia China relationship, there's always this notion that there's something wrong with their partnership, something wrong with them being together in connection with one another, either economic or geopolitical. There's always this underhanded slight because China's economy is larger than Russia's. And we know this. Everyone in the world knows this. But I think oftentimes these headlines avoid a larger point. They point to a fear in the West that's not actually often described, but it's a fear that's there. It's a fear of what's going to happen when these two get together and actually put their energy and strength together. Let's look at some of the headlines. It's common when we look at it. Moscow trip seen as a win for Big Brother Xi. These are the type of headlines you get. This constant where there's something wrong with China and Russia being together. Something wrong. There's somehow a negative because the economy of one is larger than the economy of the other. The West puts out all of these headlines. What are the weaknesses of the China-Russia relationship? There's not a desire to understand not only what the strength of the relationship is, but to understand why this relationship is so important to world events and what it could mean for the economy of the world in a good way, but also the economy in the world as it relates to competition. Because anytime you get an alliance like this, anytime you build economic blocks, there is understandably going to be competition for the world's resources, as for the world's economy, for dominance geopolitically. BRICS Plus, let's look at it because I think there's a different way to look at it. Yes, we understand there's an inequality in the size and scope of the economies between Russia and China. And for that matter, between all of the countries associated with the BRICS alliance. But the same inequality exists and is associated with the economies in the G7, with the economies in the Eurozone when compared to the United States economy. The same inequality exists, but the same narrative doesn't exist. The narrative somehow is different when talking about members of the G7 as it relates to their relationship with the United States. And arguably, when it comes to economic as well as geopolitical, you could make the argument that the members of the G7 are more attached to the United States and following this big brother, little brother scenario than Russia and China ever have been. While they have coalesced around united interest economically, geopolitically, they've always had a independence. And here's a chart that I think really helps us to be clear about what the strength of this Russia-China alliance is and how it plays a pivotal role inside of BRICS and for the entire world. When you look at this chart, you see the United States has a great GDP nominally when compared with China. But China is not that far behind. Yes, the other members of the G7 are very large and they have strong economies when compared to some of the development in the global south. But when you team China and Russia up, you get very close. The two of them are very close to what the United States GDP in nominal terms is. When you look at the GDP per capita, we always know that China, because of its large population, and other countries that have large populations, struggle in the per capita GDP area. But once again, when you combine the two of them together, there is certainly a strength there. Military spending, United States outspends everyone astronomically. I don't know if the United States militarily, for the money that they spend and for the economic development that they forego in order to invest in a ever-growing military empire, I don't know if this current Ukraine-Russia conflict shows us a weakness with all of that spending not to be able to produce the type of materials not to be able to support an ally. It's really alarming to the United States allies across the globe, considering how much $777 billion annually on defense, and you're running out of artillery shells, and you're not able to provide assistance without depleting stockpiles here at home. So I don't know if this outside spending, because of the way in which the United States economy is developed, the way in which there's constant increases, the political implications of spreading out, developing these different alliances between Congress as well as these defense manufacturers where they're spread out over congressional districts. I don't know if the efficiency is there, because for a country like Russia to be able to continue to produce, continue to provide the type of support for its soldiers speaks volumes about not just the economy, but the efficiency with which they spend their military dollars. Because this is really about economics. This channel is more about economics than it is about the military aspect of geopolitics. And from an economic standpoint, the efficiency with which China and Russia have spent their military dollars cannot be understated. Let's look at this chart here, because I think I'm going somewhere. If you stick with me, you'll see what I'm getting at. Look at this: G7 and BRICS. There's a difference when you combine all of the G7 nations and when you combine all of the BRICS nations in nominal terms. Remember that word, nominal terms, as it relates to their country's GDP and their contribution to the global economy. In nominal terms, there is definitely a disparity between the two. And we know that China and Russia make up the backbone of the BRICS alliance. But in actuality, when you really look at it, India and Brazil are right there with them, as well as the new members that have joined the alliance. All of them bring particular strengths to the alliance, some with military technology, some with natural resources. The BRICS alliance is a natural resource rich alliance. The G7, especially the European partners, when it comes to natural resources, they're consistently needing to import those resources from across the ocean with their partner, the United States, and in terms of liquefied natural gas, or from the BRICS countries. And so this reliance on outside interest for the providing of natural resources is all one of the things that consistently hampers the European economy, especially now that with the sanctions regime that is going on, it's really being difficult for countries like Germany with deindustrialization happening as a result of high energy prices. So when we look at this, each of these countries bring something to their prospective alliances. There's no denying that. But let's look a little deeper. When we look at the G7 and BRICS countries' share of global GDP at purchasing power parity. Purchasing power parity is one of those funny things. Purchasing power parity is when you account for inflation, you account for the purchasing power of the local currency and the basket of goods. It kind of balances out, because we know when you're comparing GDPs from different countries with different currencies, with different inflation rates, how do you determine the true economic strength? In 1995, when we accounted for purchasing power parity, look at the difference between the BRICS nations and the G7. In 2010, you see the gap narrowing. When you get to 2023, when you account for purchasing power parity, look what happens. Look what happens to the strength of the BRICS alliance. One, look at the trajectory of the BRICS alliance. There's not only growth in population, there's growth in the exploration of their natural resources, there's growth in their GDP, there's growth in their technology sectors. Look at what's going on. The trajectory of the BRICS alliance, undergirded by China and Russia's strength in technology and natural resources, it's moving in a direction where I'm here to tell you that this is worth taking note of. This is worth really looking at. And so no one will get mad. I know sometimes we have these terms and I present them to you and I'll get emails and people will say, oh, you didn't define this and how are you defining this? Let's go. I just put this up here to help define what PPP is. PPP involves an economic theory that compares different countries' currencies through a basket of goods approach. That is, PPP is the exchange rate at which one nation's currency would be converted into another to purchase the same amounts of a large group of products. Look at this. According to this concept, two countries are in equilibrium. Their currencies are at par when a basket of goods is priced the same in both countries, taking into account the exchange rate. So when you take into the account the exchange rate and the fluctuations and values of the currencies in each of the countries, BRICS global development, not only are they growing in GDP, but when you use the PPP form of calculation, their GDP are at par, if not ahead of the G7 countries. And this is something that you cannot deny. This is something that is alarming to some, but is exciting to others. All I'm saying is that this notion that every country in the alliance has to be equal in size in order for the alliance to have value, or in order for the members of the alliance voices to be heard, this notion of big brother and little brother really doesn't come into play when really analyzing what's going on with the China-Russia relationship, as well as what's going on within BRICS. Let's look at it a little more. China, Russia double down on ties despite complications in trade relations. Yes, each one has their own interests, but they stand for their interests, and those interests don't cause them to break away from one another economically and break away from the economic alliances they've built, partially because there's a benefit from both. Even though their economies are not equal, there's a benefit from both, because Russia has technology. China has technology. Russia has natural resources. China needs natural resources. China needs a consistent partner that is able to supply them with gas and able to supply them with oil and able to enable them to have a measure of economic independence and freedom, a geopolitical independence and freedom, because they know that if perhaps they take a position that the G7 or others don't like, they'll still have access to natural resources. They won't be cut off because, once again, they have this partner that is natural resource rich. Look at this. China moves to fill the void left by Russia's sanctions on its own terms. So China steps up, helps Russia out. Russia, in terms, economically helps China out with oil and other natural resources. Here's another way that their partnership has value. In the red, you see China's payment system. In the blue, you see Russia's payment system. What you notice is when you combine the two payment systems together, they cover a large swath of the earth. They cover many of the countries that are coming into not only the BRICS alliance, but many of the countries that desire to be a part of the BRICS alliance are covered by the duality of both of these payment systems. And so when we talk about a BRICS currency, when there's talk about shared currency and trade in local currencies, the combination of the power of the payment systems of both of these countries together make that a possibility, makes it more likely than not that together they will be able to come up with a system, especially when you add Brazil, India, when you add South Africa and others in, their contributions to the alliance, as well as those new members, they will be able to create a payment system and be able to move towards this. You all heard de-dollarization. I've got a video on it. If you've not watched it, go out there and watch some of the videos on the channel on de-dollarization. Is this movement away from the US dollar as the reserve currency. And while I'm at it, come on and give the channel a like, subscribe to the channel, help us out, leave a comment in the comment section so that we can grow the channel and continue the conversation. China's major terrestrial cables passing through Russia. Their alliance is one that is a codependency rather than a big brother, little brother. China needs Russia to gain access to other parts of the world, other parts, going into Europe, going into other parts of Asia. It gets access not only for their cables, their land-based cables, but it does get access for trains. We know the Silk Road Initiative is still heavily dependent upon the cooperation and collaboration between China and Russia. What does the China, Mongolia, Russia economic corridor mean for Mongolia? We talked about the cables. We've talked about Silk Road. If you go back to some of the other videos, if you frequent those, we've talked about China's Silk Road Initiative. But one in particular that draws in yet another country into this coalition is the China, Mongolia, Russia economic corridor, which has extreme economic potential. It's leading from China, Mongolia, into Russia, going all the way to the west into Europe. And this is going to be a powerful corridor because it's going to link lots of the parts. When you look at the other rail and other road networks within China, within Russia, within Mongolia, once again, it's connecting these economies in a way that drives down the transportation costs for goods and services, but it's also connecting for tourism and for other economic aspects of their economy. Let's look at it a little bit closely. Transport routes of the China, Mongolia, Russian Federation economic corridor. While the corridor is that main line that is coming from the eastern part of China all the way through Mongolia into Russia, there are lots of trains, as I just mentioned. There's lots of trains, rails, and other modes of transportation that connect with the main line on this corridor, which once again is bridging the gap. Shortening the distance for transportation of goods and services will increase trade. Not only will it increase trade, but it will increase the profitability by lowering the cost for the transport of those goods and the transports of those resources back and forth between China, Russia, and Mongolia. Some of the numbers have been out for a while when you look at this corridor. Potential minerals output, 110 million tons. Potential export of minerals, 80 million tons. Current export of minerals were 47 million. Current export of coal by road was 31.6 million. Planned capacity, 54 million. It's going to be a game changer. When you look at it in terms of tourism, Russian Federation, 45. When you look at the 45 million, Republic of Korea, 28.7 million, Japan, 20 million. It's going to be a strong enhancement for the economy. This corridor is going to link different parts